You enter the room, and there's a large scaled beast, standing 25 foot tall, sharp fangs. He looks at you and roars, and in the mouth of this giant creature is a bright red eye staring back at you. What do you do?
I charge in. I take my sword and I just charge in
All
and I
right,
attack him.
roll for initiative.
All right. 20!
Wow. All right, so it's your turn to attack again, Chris.
All right. I miss. We've been at it for like, what, 2 hours? Like,
Yeah, but
is it almost dead?
yeah, so I mean, you haven't really targeted the weak spot. Remember, he's roaring. There's a red eye.
All right. So I need to hit the one thing again. I attack the red eye.
Yeah.
19.
You hit.
All right.
First hit.
First hit.
A good combat can be the most memorable moment in a campaign.
But there's some pits and falls that you need to avoid as a game master. Hi, I'm Chris.
And I'm Matt.
Welcome to Roleplay Chat.
We are two game masters who can't stop talking about role-playing games.
And today we talk about creating encounters, the basis of it, and this is the bite-sized version of our roleplay chat that you can find on our channel.
Yeah, it's a pretty long conversation, so we figured we'd shrink it down into 7 tips and tricks that you can apply to make your combats more fun, more interesting, and a little bit more engaging.
Yeah, it's all about steps, so we'll start right away. So the first step we do when we build an encounter is figure out why we're doing this encounter. So what's your intention as a game master? What's your motivation behind it?
It can be an interrupt, it can be to drive plot forward, or it could be for other reasons. But just know what your intentions are. The next step that you should be considering when you're creating your combat is to try to come up with the objectives your players need to meet to be successful in this combat. And try to be diverse. Don't always make it just fight to win or fight to kill. Add hostages or interesting things that they need to retrieve, items, treasure chests, magic items, what have you.
Yeah, and a good way to do it is have multiple objectives, sometimes parallel, where they can choose which one they want to tackle, and that affects their character and the story.
Mutually exclusive from one another. You can only achieve one, or you can only achieve a few, but if you spread your resources too thin, you'll fail at all of them.
Yeah, that might be an interesting way to do it. And also, I like to think of different level of success. So what happens if they do A or if they do B? Are they able to do both? So what's the best case scenario? What's the worst case scenario? Stuff like that. And then you have at the step 3 to think about what are the rewards of succeeding at those objectives and what's the cost of failing.
Try to think of creative ways to really make failure interesting. You don't just want failure to be, oh, now you've used all your spell slots and you have no more HP. It should be an NPC died, or someone you really care about has been taken away, or there's now this new obstacle that you have to confront. It shouldn't be so big that it's going to set everybody back 5 games, but it should still be meaningful enough either to the player's backstory or to the overall progress of the game that pushes it forward, but still feels like a bad thing for the players to have to confront.
Yeah, forward, not backward.
Yeah.
And the rewards, usually the books, depending on the system, will tell you XP, equipment, information, plot reveal, stuff like that.
But you want to try to make it more than just numbers, right? You want to try to give meaning to these rewards. Our next tip is to think of who they're fighting. Think of the enemies, the composition of the enemies, their tactics, but also, you know, if it's a plot-driven combat, what factions are there?
Yeah, in the discussion, we've talked a little bit about that. We'll go deeper in other conversation about building the actual encounter. Then once you have the who's there, is where, the location. So sometimes it might not be fixed. Most of the time it will be, depending on, again, that's why we start with the intention behind it, because that's going to build the rest of the steps. So once you know where, the 6th step is to think of when this is going to happen. Is it going to be a surprise? When are they going to get reinforcement? That might also affect your decision. And
last but certainly not least is to think of how.
Yeah, I think that's might be a little bit of a debate here.
Yeah. I know that a lot of people say don't come up with solutions for your players. Let them be the ones to come up with the solutions. But here what we're saying is not come up with the one way they can solve this combat or they can defeat the enemy. But instead, try to put yourself in their shoes. Think of how they might tackle the problem. For instance, do they want to stealth around? Or do they want to charm someone to get their way? Well, if they're going to do these things and your combat hasn't been built to allow them to do those things, you might want to consider adding elements into the combat that allows them the flexibility to explore those options. I think it's really something that, Chris and I do a lot is we come up with a handful of possible solutions, but coming up with those solutions allows us to further flesh out the combat and the encounter to be even more versatile. You don't always need to do that, but it's something that can definitely benefit definitely benefit your situation.
Yeah, it's really a tool of inspiring yourself to put new things in the encounter and not limiting the player's option. It's actually the opposite. So yeah, one thing we haven't mentioned yet is it's not a thing is because it's done all the way through, but it's considering difficulty. Mm-hmm. And what I would do is I would set a difficulty that I had in mind, but if they plan well, this might be easier than I thought. I tend to give the carrot, but not a lot the sticks. The stick, I will not bring the difficulty up. I will reward them for good planning. The encounter will be easier. But if they do poor planning, then it might become a bit harder. And there's some caveat we talked about. If it's the final encounter is the climax of a story of the campaign. If it's way too easy, it might not be as fun. So that's one situation I might bring back the difficulty up a little bit. But otherwise, I tend to reward my players for good planning.
That covers pretty much the entire Roleplay Chat episode. We've condensed it as quickly as we can to give you guys, like we said, 7 great tips. We'll include all 7 tips in a nice little list down below in the doobly-doo. You can also find other things in there, like our contact information, our Twitter handle, all of that. So please reach out to us and do what you need to do if you have questions or if you want to propose other things that are related to combat for us. And I think that sums up everything we need to say for this here, Chris.
That's all, Matt.
Let's call it a chat.